Welcome to the week that was, but we mostly wish it wasn't, for the week ending October 24th, 2025. This is a weekly roundup of the highlights and lowlights of campus anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. This week I had about 55 stories to choose from. If something's happening in your neck of the woods, please be sure to let me know. I'm your host, Andrew Pessin. I am a professor. Please don't hate me. For more about me and my work, visit andrewpessin.com. For all the details of today's stories and loads more stories, follow me on X at Andrew Pessin. Let's get to the news. It was a busy week. We begin with Pomona College, where anti-Israel protesters published an anonymous manifesto this week, allegedly authored by demonstrators who had recently stormed a campus commemoration of the October 7th massacre, featuring a survivor of that massacre. During the disruption, they yelled that Zionism is colonialism and you're all complicit in genocide before campus safety finally removed them. But now in the manifesto, they refer to the survivor as Satan and the spawn of a genocidal lineage and state that Zionism is a death cult that must be dealt with accordingly. Continuing, they note that this moment demands making modern Nazis feel unwelcome, not just from college campuses, but everywhere, and that Claremont Hillel and every single Zionist in that room advanced the genocide. Continuing, they note that Pomona College will go to any length to despicably defend genocide and paint black and brown bodies who resist as violent. So somehow they object to the Hamas terrorists massacring 1,200 people. They object to calling them violent. Therefore, it came as no surprise when they hosted a genocidal maniac, namely the survivor of that act of genocide, to speak for a memorial of the casualties of Al-Aqsa flood. Meanwhile, at Harvard University, they have put up over this past week an enormous 12-panel display alleging all sorts of terrible things about Israel, of course, like the typical apartheid wall, but roughly double in size, I believe. The display includes praising a poet who had declared that Zionism is a disease and handing out literature saying that Jews are responsible for displacing 1.9 million people today in Gaza. Again, this is in the center of a major space on campus. It was up for a week. At UC Berkeley, Keffiyeh masked anti-Israel protesters held a teach-in on the stairs of the library this afternoon. 2 hours into the demonstration, campus police officers in riot gear assembled outside as protesters fled the building. No arrests were made, and authorities say they couldn't determine if the protesters were students. Again, the participants wore keffiyehs and face masks, as had the Pomona College disruptors, which makes one wonder, why are they still permitting masks on campuses? Georgetown University, along with St. Joseph's University. As part of a Gaza lecture series at St. Joseph's, St. Joseph's was live streaming a Georgetown lecture sponsoring philosopher Jason Stanley, apparently accusing Israel, quote, of a legacy of genocide. The good news is that after some pressure, St. Joseph's canceled the live streaming, but I believe the Georgetown lecture itself is continuing on. At Boston University, they are hosting an event entitled Anti-Semitism, What It Is, What It Is Not, and What to Do, featuring speakers tied to the BDS and anti-Zionist movements, of course, framed as an equity discussion. University of California, San Diego, a professor there teaching a course in ethnic studies, a mandatory course in the ethnic studies program, frames Israel as, quote, genocidal and encourages students to, quote, defeat the surveillance regime of UC San Diego. Again, this is a mandatory course. It also teaches something new, that Israel is committing a new atrocity, sophicide, explaining that sophicide is the Zionist regime's deliberate annihilation of indigenous knowledge traditions, as well as the carriers of that knowledge, including elders and women. It involves the crushing of Palestinian life and learning through the systematic murder of Palestinian students, mentors, teachers, researchers, scholars, academics. The list goes on. So Israel defending itself from a genocidal regime is apparently a systematic murder of Palestinian creators of knowledge and culture. At the University of Maryland this week, the Students for Justice in Palestine chapter there, along with Maryland's Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, attempted to cancel an event sponsored by Students Supporting Israel, featuring 3 Israel Defense Force soldiers talking about their experiences defending Israel and defending Jewish life in Gaza. The campaign against the event put out literature saying we cannot allow war criminals to be celebrated while students at this university are mourning Gaza's dead. Our University must choose a side, the side of humanity and justice or the side with genocide and complicity. In my opinion, they've, of course, reversed who is who there. They had over 400 students sign the tradition, complaining that the soldiers' presence could traumatize and endanger the safety and dignity of Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim students on campus. And yet, they seem to have no problem with endless rallies calling for the mass murder of Jews. At the University of Pennsylvania, the AAUP chapter, American Association of University Professors, once a storied institution, now a very strongly progressive left-wing anti-Israel group, they apparently object to the university even investigating anti-Semitism complaints, noting that when various professors or staff members are um, uh, charged with anti-Semitic behavior or speech, etc., and then they get investigated, AAUP objects, even when these meetings do not result in further investigation or disciplinary action, simply summoning faculty members when the office receives a complaint chills faculty members' research, teaching, and speech, they claim. So, in other words, don't investigate anti-Semitism. At Oxford this week, it was a busy week in the United Kingdom with Oxford in particular. The Oxford Union there had a whole scandal. You might recall the student president of that union, openly celebrated the murder of Charlie Kirk. There were calls for a no confidence vote. That vote was a total mess. It eventually got suspended because people were, it seems like the anti-Israel crowd in particular, were intimidating people. There were all sorts of irregularities. There was a report that the vote was canceled, but then finally the union eventually announced that the motion had passed, and so that person has been removed from office. Also in the UK, at the University of London, City University of St. George's, a professor there, Michael Ben God, an economics professor, there's a campaign that students are running demanding that he be fired because he's an Israeli Jew who 40 years ago did his mandatory military service in the IDF. He's been subjected to extreme harassment. There was a major disruption of his class, including students yelling at him that they were going to behead him. The university has apparently offered the professor paid leave and to provide security for his classes, but as of now, I have not seen any reports that they're actually planning to discipline the students running the campaign in any way. Also, a busy week in the lawsuit/legal department at MIT. They have beaten a discrimination lawsuit that was filed by a pro-Israel group and two Jewish students, claiming that the prestigious college hadn't done enough to quell anti-Israel protests and made these students feel, in fact, be unsafe on campus. The court ruled that the students' accusations, quote, do not plausibly rise to the level of actionable harassment, end quote, and according to the plaintiffs, some of the allegations include the following: that Jewish students at MIT were prevented for months from accessing portions of campus, blocked from attending classes, physically intimidated, assaulted, ridiculed, doxxed, subjected to anti-Jewish chants, and shunned and excluded from various student groups. Activists disrupted classes, sent mass emails to students justifying the Hamas massacre, vandalized a vigil for the attack victims, and organized protests outside Jewish professors' offices, and more. But that didn't arise to the level of actionable harassment, apparently. At Northwestern University, CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations, is suing Northwestern on behalf of the school's graduate workers for Palestine, alleging that subjecting students to mandatory anti-Semitism training amounts to violating the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by basically discriminating against Palestinians. So Jewish students protesting being genocided amounts to discrimination against Palestinians there. A federal judge did block their attempt to stop the anti-Semitism training, so that will go forward, and the university continues to block students from registering who refuse to take that training, but the lawsuit continues. In the BDS department, very quickly, Lewis and Clark College, and I think in Oregon, succumbed to BDS pressure this week and has divested from weapons manufacturers. Their SJP is bragging about their victory that they did it. And Italy, something must be going on in the water over there. University of Bologna Academic Senate joins the wave of Italian universities ending all ties with Israeli universities. University of Milan Academic Senate voted unanimously for no ties with Israeli universities or institutions. The University of Venice Ca' Foscari also has voted for no new ties with Israeli entities and to suspend existing agreements. A busy week as well in the K through 12 department. Oakland K through 12, the California Department of Education found that the Oakland Unified School District discriminated against Jewish persons when it repeatedly published materials for Arab American Heritage Month that included a map of the Middle East, excluding Israel and referring to it as Palestine. In Illinois, in the K through 12 department, Illinois has mandated anti-racism training for K through 12 educators, and two of the educators in their new video are racist themselves, Jew haters apparently, who support terrorism and wear keffiyehs in the training video. In New Jersey, CARE has issued its back to school resource guide and is distributing it to teachers as much as it can. And it's instructing teachers to frame the Israeli Palestinian conflict as, quote, relentless U.S. Israel violence, end quote, reject treating anti Israelism as anti Semitic. It omits mention of Hamas in the October 7th massacre and recommends Osama bin Laden's letter to America that justifies the 9/11 attacks as important reading. Students openly supporting violence. In Scotland, the University of Glasgow is now investigating students who were celebrating the October 7th Hamas-led attacks recently. And they put out media calling on students to come celebrate the glorious Al-Aqsa flood. We celebrate the glorious flood, which permanently crippled the Zionist entity, putting it into a state of slow but inevitable collapse. And finally, shenanigans off campus, anti-Semitism off campus, New York City, the new Anti-Defamation League report on exploding anti-Semitic incidents in New York City. And this is, of course, prior to the coming election of anti-Israel candidate Mamdani. The report documents an alarming number of anti-Semitic incidents, including harassment, vandalism, physical violence in New York City throughout 2025. This follows their tracking of last year's record-breaking nearly 1,000 incidents in New York City in 2024. And finally, in Vienna, a 12-year-old boy was beaten up for being a Jew. If that sounds familiar, just review your history of the 1930s in Europe. That's the news, unfortunately. Tune in next week to see what fresh horrors next week may bring. Again, I'm your host, Andrew Pessin at andrewpessin.com, and hoping everyone manages to hold it together next week.